There are places where reality seems more fragile, where shadows are denser, where silence isn't empty, it's presence. The state of Kentucky, in the southeastern United States, is known for its ancient caves, Appalachian forests, and towns forgotten by time. But there's another side to this place, a side rarely shown on maps, a side that lives between whispers, apparitions, and entities that shouldn't exist. Today, you'll discover 5 real legends, little known and deeply disturbing, that emerge from the depths of Kentucky folklore. Stories involving beings beneath the earth, creatures watching from above, presences whispering in caves, and curses buried in swamps where justice never arrived. These stories aren't exaggerations or popular fiction. They've been documented, investigated, some never explained. And if you think you've heard everything about American urban legends, this video will prove that Kentucky harbors horrors few dare to explore. Watch until the end and decide for yourself what's real and what's only the beginning. The Hellier creatures, the beings from the mountain. In eastern Kentucky, surrounded by thick mountains and the silent shadows of the Appalachians, there is a small town, forgotten by time and almost erased from maps. Hellier, a place where days seem to repeat endlessly. The roads are unpaved, and the wind carries whispers no one dares interpret. Here lives a legend that few dare to mention out loud. With just over 200 inhabitants and a suffocating feeling that something remains lurking beneath the surface, Hellier doesn't appear at first glance like the kind of town where the veil between our world and the inexplicable could tear apart. But it was exactly here that one of the strangest, most unsettling and unsolved cases in modern American folklore began to emerge, not from the sky, nor from imagination, but from deep within the earth. In 2012, 2 paranormal investigators, Carl Pfeiffer and Connor Randall, received an anonymous email. The message came from a man named David Christie, claiming his home, located near Hellier, was being invaded at night by strange creatures, small beings with shining eyes and movements impossible to explain. According to David, these entities were about 3 feet tall, with grey skin, long arms, thin fingers, and eyes like headlights. But they didn't walk. They slid across the ground, disappearing into shadows as if they were part of them. He said they emerged from the forest surrounding his house, especially on the darkest nights, trying to enter through windows, ventilation ducts, and even walls. David described nights of pure terror, scratching on the doors, footsteps on the roof, short whispers coming from the basement, even though it had been cemented shut years before. His 5-year-old daughter said she had played with the little man of light inside her room. According to her, he had no mouth but laughed with his eyes. The tension escalated. David began hearing rhythmic knocks on the walls, seeing figures in the mirror, and finding small twisted footprints in the mud around the house. He installed cameras, but almost all stopped working around 3 a.m. The dogs would bark toward the woods, then flee, howling, and then David disappeared. After that initial email, he never responded again. The account was deactivated. The address couldn't be traced. Any records linking a David Christie to the region simply didn't exist. Nevertheless, Carl and Connor decided to investigate. They traveled to Hellier. What they found there was far more than they expected. The town seemed isolated from the world. The silence was profound, almost hostile. Some residents refused to speak about the case. Others claimed never to have heard anything similar. But a pattern began to emerge. Several old reports of small figures with large eyes, always appearing near caves or abandoned mines. Hellier sits atop a vast network of mining tunnels, hundreds of kilometers of subterranean darkness, many of which are only partially mapped. Older locals mentioned that below lived the Grey Folk, creatures that are neither from here nor there. In historical documents, investigators discovered a newspaper from 1892 describing small demonic apparitions seen by miners who spent days fasting. These descriptions matched perfectly the ones given by David Christie, over 120 years apart. As the investigation progressed, phenomena intensified. Recordings captured metallic voices, seemingly answering questions before they were asked. One of the most famous recordings simply said, "We are below." Electronic equipment failed. Telephone companies reported untraceable interference. Investigators began having lucid dreams about tunnels and unknown symbols. Some even felt physical changes. tingling, head pressure, memory lapses. Soon, an even more disturbing theory emerged. The Helia creatures aren't aliens, ghosts, or human creations. They are something between worlds, ancient intelligences living underground, interacting with the living only when necessary, or when provoked. And there's evidence that Helia isn't the only place where this happens. Kentucky's caves form one of the world's largest natural networks, connecting locations far beyond the state. The darkest theory suggests these creatures are everywhere, and Helia was merely a point of contact, but the case was never resolved. There was no conclusion, no body, no logical explanation. The man who reported everything disappeared as if he had never existed, and Helia remains there, motionless, like an open wound waiting to be touched again. Would you believe it if you saw it with your own eyes? But what happens when terror doesn't come from below, but from above? When the threat watches silently from above, waiting for just the right moment to approach? The next legend will show you that not every monster needs to hide in the shadows to be deadly. The Pope Lick Goatman, the creature of the bridge. A few miles from Louisville, hidden among twisted trees and rusty tracks of a forgotten railway, there is a bridge with a gentle name, but a dark reputation, Pope Lick Bridge. At first glance, it seems just another old structure over railroad tracks, used by local youths as a meeting point, hiking trail, or refuge for those seeking silence. But on the darkest nights, when mist covers the tracks like a veil and the wind stops blowing, strange things begin to happen there. Some say it's superstition, others swear they've seen it with their own eyes. But there's only one truth: whoever crosses this bridge may never return the same. The legend speaks of a creature, part man, part goat, a horrific fusion of flesh and nightmare with legs similar to a goat's, a thin humanoid body with rigid muscles, twisted horns like petrified snakes, and eyes glowing in the dark, red as headlights from hell. He is known as the Goatman of Pope Lick, but he doesn't appear to everyone. He chooses his victims. He waits, he observes, and when he senses weakness, he calls out. Many accounts speak of mysterious voices whispered in the wind, voices that mimic people you know, a friend, a family member, a loved one. They say, "Come over here, just one more step." And that's the most dangerous moment, because the Goatman doesn't chase, he hypnotizes. It's as if he enters people's minds, manipulating their thoughts, erasing their fear, until the impulse to walk along the tracks becomes irresistible. What makes this legend even more chilling is that it doesn't only exist in imagination. Lives have truly been lost there. Young people drawn by stories of the creature climbed onto the bridge. Some fell. Others were hit by trains that still pass through, silent until the last second. And with every tragedy, locals say they heard something in the bushes, something laughing. The creature doesn't kill with its own hands. It convinces you to kill yourself for it. Some theorists believe the Goatman is the ghost of a circus performer who was tortured, tied and burned for being different. Others claim he was summoned in an occult ritual more than 100 years ago, and that his presence is linked to blood pacts made by secret groups in nearby forests. Everyone agrees on one thing: he isn't just a monster. He is a symbol, an entity that feeds on curiosity, recklessness, and fear. Today, the bridge is considered a danger zone. Signs warn of the hazard. Local police have tried fencing off the area, but every year someone returns, driven by doubt, adrenaline, or the desire to prove the legend is only a legend. Not all return, and those who do never again look directly at the bridge. There are places where death is a physical threat, but there are places like Pope Lick, where death hides inside the mind. But not all terror reveals itself on the surface. Some wait patiently in stone corridors stretching for miles underground, where time and sound seem to cease existing, and there, in absolute silence, something listens, and sometimes it answers. The Whispers of Mammoth Cave, the Voice of Darkness. About 100 miles south of Louisville, in the heart of rural Kentucky, there exists an underground world that defies logic, time, and even sanity. We aren't talking about just any cave. We're talking about the largest cave system on the planet, a colossal labyrinth with over 400 miles of mapped tunnels and hundreds still unexplored. Its name is Mammoth Cave, and it's not just vast, it's alive. And according to many, it listens. Thousands of tourists visit Mammoth every year. Yet few know that since the earliest records of the cave, there have been disturbing accounts of unexplained experiences. Stories told in whispers by guides, spelunkers, historians, and even government agents. People hearing voices where no one was present, lights where no electricity existed, and a call coming from the deepest parts. In the mid-18th century, the first explorers entered the cave in search of saltpeter, an essential component for gunpowder. Many workers refused to return, claiming they felt pressure on the skull, saw figures with white eyes, and heard words in a language neither human nor natural. One of the oldest accounts mentions a group entering a newly discovered chamber. According to a diary entry from one of them, the temperature suddenly dropped, and their torches started going out one by one, as if something was draining the light. They heard footsteps, but nobody spoke. One of the men swore someone grabbed his hand in the dark, but when the lights returned, only stones surrounded them. From then on, dozens of similar reports surfaced, whispers that seemed to emerge from walls, sounds of footsteps following visitors, even when alone, feelings of being watched very closely, yet never visible. Over the decades, new corridors were discovered. Some received macabre names inspired by feelings experienced by those who passed through. One of the most famous is the Whispering Gallery, a natural corridor where even the faintest whisper is amplified and distorted, echoing for hundreds of feet, creating the impression voices are coming from every direction simultaneously. But there's something even more disturbing. Some whispers don't just respond, they ask questions. I was a guide there for 14 years, took hundreds of tourists. I always thought it was just legend, until one time a boy from the group got lost. It was only 2 minutes, but when we found him, he was trembling and crying. And he told me, the voice from the stone called my name. He was 7 years old, and nobody said his name during the tour. Theorists speculate that the cave's structure, combined with the absolute silence of its depths, could cause auditory hallucinations. Others suggest natural electromagnetic phenomena interfering with the human brain. But some go further, much further. Indigenous cultures inhabiting the region before colonization avoided the cave entrances. Some tribes called the area Mouth of Darkness. For them, the cave wasn't a place to dwell and be, it was a prison. Ancient inscriptions found in remote parts of the cave, not open to the public, depict repetitive symbols, eyes, spirals, human figures being engulfed by shadows. Anthropologists studying these drawings noted a strange pattern. A large central figure with long arms and no face, always surrounded by small vertical lines. The name given to it is simple and cold, the one who dwells in silence. In 2004, a group of amateur explorers recorded audio during an expedition. In one clip, a voice resembling a child is heard whispering, "You are where I was." No child was part of the expedition. Even today, visitors report feelings of disorientation, sudden chills, abrupt mood swings, and most commonly, the impression of being watched, but from all directions simultaneously. Some guides refuse to pass through certain areas. Others demand absolute silence when entering particular corridors, not out of respect for the environment, but because they say it only responds when you listen carefully. Mammoth Cave is the largest subterranean system known to humanity. But it isn't the physical space that frightens those who venture inside. It's what can't be explained, what moves in the dark, what repeats your name even when no one has said it. But not every presence hides in shadows or silence. Some knock on your door, speak to you, watch your house for hours, and when they arrive, you have no choice, you're surrounded. The Sutton family siege, the Hopkinsville case. August 1955. A suffocating heat blankets rural Kentucky. The fields are dry, the sky feels stagnant, and night falls heavy as lead. In the small community of Kelly near the town of Hopkinsville, an ordinary family is about to experience one of the most disturbing and inexplicable events in modern American history. An event involving detailed testimonies, multiple witnesses, police intervention, and a type of terror that didn't come from hell, but perhaps from the sky. That night, the Sutton family home was crowded. Besides the residents, visitors, friends, and children were present, a total of 11 people inside the rural property. It all started when Billy Ray Taylor, a family friend, went out to fetch water from the well. He stopped midway. Above him, a gigantic light crossed the sky in absolute silence, falling behind a small hill. He ran back breathless, recounting what he'd seen, but no one believed him, yet. A few minutes later, the dogs began barking restlessly, growling toward the bushes. Then came the sound, dry, like claws dragging across the roof. That's when someone saw the first creature. It stood at the edge of the woods, motionless, observing the house. About 3 feet tall, it had arms disproportionate to its body, thin fingers with claws, metallic skin, and enormous eyes shining like lanterns. Its ears were pointed, like a bat's, and even though it stood still, it hovered slightly above the ground. Panic erupted. The shocked family grabbed weapons and began firing. Bullets struck the creatures, making them spin or fall, but none bled. None appeared injured, and they always got back up. They didn't run. They observed and returned, always silently. For the next 4 hours, the house was literally besieged. Creatures appeared at windows, on the roof, in the yard, behind fences. Some seemed to toy with the residents, appearing out of nowhere and vanishing when illuminated. They didn't want to come inside. They just wanted to watch, to wait, to test us. Near 3 a.m., in complete despair, the family managed to escape the house and ran to the Hopkinsville police station. 11 witnesses, panicked, trembling, some crying, all recounting the same story. Police went to the scene. Investigations were carried out. There were bullet holes, broken windows, damaged doors, but no creatures, no physical traces. The next day, media transformed the event into national headlines. While some mocked the incident, ufologists, researchers, and even government agents began to investigate. The Kelly-Hopkinsville incident became a global reference for close encounters of the third kind. The most astonishing detail? To this day, the accounts haven't changed. In interviews decades later, survivors' descriptions remained identical, word for word. None of the witnesses ever recanted. And here begins the true mystery. Similar cases, involving small metallic creatures with glowing eyes and intelligent behavior, have been reported elsewhere in the state, even near Hellier. Some researchers suggest Kentucky is an intersection between dimensions, where certain non-human intelligences test, observe, or manifest themselves. But what's truly frightening about this case isn't what was seen. It's the creature's behavior. They didn't attack. They didn't invade. They didn't destroy. They waited, watched, tested boundaries, and then they left. But left behind a disturbing emptiness, as if it had been merely the beginning of something much larger. The Hopkinsville case remains one of the most consistent and documented accounts in modern paranormal history. Even nearly 70 years later, no one has proven or disproven what really happened that night. Yet the questions still echo, and those who listen carefully might sense that something is still out there, waiting. But there is one Kentucky legend that doesn't hide behind technology or move in absolute silence. She wears a veil, walks on water, and carries an ancient curse still feared today by the elders, even when nobody dares say her name aloud. The Green Man of Monroe County, when silence screams. In southern Kentucky, where fields are vast and hills ripple like old scars on the land, there exists a county forgotten by many, yet remembered with fear by those who grew up there. Monroe County, a rural region, simple folk, surrounded by dense forests and mist-covered hills, a place where time seems to move more slowly, where stories are passed in whispers, and some are never told to outsiders. But one story insists on returning, generation after generation, an ancient presence, invisible until it's too late. They call him the Green Man. But among the elders, there's a name no one speaks lightly, the Devourer of Silence. The first reports emerged in the late 1950s. Families in isolated areas began noticing strange sound blackouts on their lands, moments when all night sounds, crickets, frogs, owls, ceased simultaneously for entire minutes. And within this silence, he appeared, described as a tall, hunched figure with grayish-green skin, completely hairless, small eyes reflecting light like liquid silver. His arms were long, disproportionate to his body, and his feet seemed deformed, as if not meant to walk on this kind of earth. He never ran, never made a sound, but always watched. A farmer named Caleb Price in 1961 reported seeing the creature next to his barn. He said that when he tried to approach, his flashlight stopped working, his dog fled, and The sound simply vanished, as if the world had paused. When the creature turned its face toward him, Caleb described feeling as if something had touched his brain from the inside. He fainted. He woke 3 hours later, nose bleeding, and small blisters on his fingertips. In 1963, an 8-year-old boy disappeared for nearly 3 hours during the afternoon. He was found in a cornfield, walking in circles, eyes fixed on something invisible. When his mother embraced him, he only said, "The man with no mouth tried to touch me. He wanted me to stay there." Then he cried for hours, without stopping, without explanation. Almost all reports occurred after storms. The sound blackout was the main indication of his presence. Marks on the ground, circular-shaped like an inverted horseshoe, were found near barns, corrals, or field boundaries. In 1971, a farm was abandoned after residents found scratches on doors and symbols burned into barn rafters. The family never returned. He doesn't knock, doesn't scream, he just stands there, and silence surrounds you like a damp sheet. We knew it was him when even our souls went mute. Despite decades of reports, there are no official records, no news coverage, no fully documented cases, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Most accounts were passed orally among families who learned to recognize the signs. The rule was simple. If the sound stops, get inside, lock the door, don't look out the window, and for the love of God, don't speak. Some suggest the Green Man is a natural being, hidden in caves deep within Kentucky, a life form surviving where no one looked. Others claim he's a visitor from another plane, an observer sent by something greater, studying human emotions, especially fear. But among older locals, the most accepted explanation is different. He's an echo, a reflection of deeds done on this land long ago, things that deserved silence. You may have never heard of the Green Man of Monroe County, but if someday you're out in the countryside and suddenly everything goes absolutely quiet, no wind, no crickets, nothing, run or stay, but don't say a word, because when silence takes over, he's the one listening. What would you do if you saw something no one else has seen? What if the world stopped speaking to you, just for a moment, so that something else could hear better? The Swamp Witch of Pilot Town, the guardian of the curse. In southern Kentucky, near the delta where rivers meet flooded fields, there existed, or perhaps still exists, a small, isolated community known as Pilot Town. Today, the place no longer appears on maps. Its wooden houses, once built on stilts to escape flooding, are slowly sinking into the mud. Vegetation swallowed the roads. Silence took over the windows. But there's a legend that's never been forgotten. A story that old residents tell while looking over their shoulders, as if someone might be listening. They say that more than 100 years ago, a solitary woman lived in Pilot Town. Nobody knew where she came from or even her real name. She was known only as Marrow, the Lady of the Black Veil. She spoke to no one. She didn't go to church. Yet she knew how to heal wounds, prepare teas, care for the sick, even when doctors said it was impossible. And that was enough for the devout, religious, and suspicious town to start looking at her with fear and contempt. Over time, Marrow began to be accused of dark practices. Chickens hatched without eyes, cornfields rotted overnight, children claimed to see a woman walking on the swamp, her feet never touching the water. Then, on a summer night, 4 men from the village went to her house. They said they would put an end to evil. What happened inside that house was never recorded, but people say the screams weren't only from Marrow, but from voices that weren't human. At dawn, the house was found empty, burned inside, yet without any signs of fire outside. No body, no blood, only footprints, small, barefoot, leading toward the center of the swamp, then disappearing. From then on, the village began to die. Crops failed, diseases spread, and children began to vanish. Some were found days later, wandering aimlessly, repeating the same verse. She said she'd take me, but she brought me back. Others never returned. My grandmother said if you saw the veiled woman, you had to pretend you didn't see her, because she only takes those who respond. She only takes those who acknowledge her. Over the years, Pilot Town emptied. Families moved away. The church was abandoned. The cemetery sank, and the town vanished from official maps. But even today, adventurers approaching the region report intense feelings of dizziness, footsteps in the mud, and the sight of a distant woman standing among the branches, her face covered by a veil. Most leave before learning more. Some stay too long. And no one stays too long without paying the price. A group of documentary filmmakers who attempted to film the area reported a total loss of signal, cameras suddenly drained of power, and audio recordings made at night that none of the crew had recorded. In one segment, a soft and clear female voice whispers, "You know I'm here." The legend says, the witch never died, never rested, never forgave. She became part of the swamp, a guardian spirit, but vengeful. An entity watching every step of those approaching Pilot Town, and she never forgets those who speak too much. Today, Pilot Town is just a shadow, an echo of a community swallowed by its own fear. But the legend remains alive. It spreads through whispered stories, warnings left at crossroads, letters never sent. And if someday, walking through a lonely place, you hear a woman calling your name, don't answer, just run. These were 5 of the most disturbing, mysterious, and rarely explored legends from Kentucky, a place where shadows have history. Silence has a voice, and the impossible seems just another disguised routine. These were 5 disturbing legends forgotten by books, but alive in the memories of those who dare remember. Stories that cross time, and maybe something more. Because in Kentucky, the impossible doesn't ask for permission, it simply happens. You've heard the voices, seen eyes in the shadows. Now tell me, which of these stories stayed with you until now? Comment down below which legend marked you most, and subscribe to the channel to keep traveling with me through the darkest and most forgotten regions of the world. On our next journey, we'll follow even older trails, where time distorts, fear takes shape, and some doors should never be opened. Sometimes, what we call a legend is just a memory the world tried to forget. If you'd like to see one of these episodes read as a horror tale, comment, "I want to hear the complete legend." Do you want part 2 set in another forgotten state? Comment the name of the state you'd like me to explore. Tag a friend who doesn't believe any of this, and see if they'll still sleep peacefully tonight.